Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Meeting of the Minds webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing how the innovation incubator IN2 is scaling emerging clean tech solutions for energy-smart buildings. My name is Jessie Feller-Hahn. I'm the Executive Director of Meeting of the Minds. Meeting of the Minds, as many of you know, is a global thought leadership network and platform with year-round digital and in-person programming. We connect global urban sustainability, innovation, and technology leaders across sectors to share best practices, tools, and solutions through our blog, our monthly webinar series, pop-up events, workshops, meetups, and conferences. Our 11th annual Fall Leadership Summit convenes next month from October 23 to 25 in Cleveland, Ohio. We still do have a few spots available. We're almost sold out, but you can register at meetingoftheminds.org if you want to join us there. So I'm pleased to introduce our three presenters today. First, we have Ashley Grosh, who's Vice President and Manager of Strategic Environmental Philanthropy for Wells Fargo, where she manages a $100 million environmental philanthropy fund to support the company's sustainability initiatives and CSR goals. We also have David Rowe, who provides project management oversight and coordination on all LiquidCool Solutions research and development projects. We'll hear from him. We're also going to hear from Eric Kozabal, who is Project Principal Investigator at National Renewable Energy Lab. Eric researches new methods and technologies for energy-efficient air conditioning systems. He has tested more than 25 HVAC components and systems, including direct expansion, evaporative, and desiccant technologies. He improves manufacturers' products by providing detailed performance analysis and design recommendations. So with that, I will hand it over to Ashley. Ashley, go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jessie, and thanks to all of you for dialing in today. We're really honored to be a part of the Meeting of the Minds, part of this webinar, and happy to answer your questions either on today's call or connect with you afterwards. So I'm from Wells Fargo, as Jessie mentioned, one of the co-creators of the IN2 program. And so I'm going to walk you through just a couple minutes on how we built this program, why it's meaningful for Wells Fargo and our mission to help advance and commercialize clean technologies. So next slide, please. Little agenda again about the IN2 program, and then we're going to feature LiquidCool Solutions, one of our portfolio companies, and then as Jessie mentioned, take your questions. Next. So you may be wondering, why did Wells Fargo launch a technology incubator? Pretty unique. So let me kind of walk you through that. Why does this make sense for a large financial institution? And really this was born out of our environmental commitment. So as a large corporate enterprise, we've got a sustainability group. And in 2012, we came up with a comprehensive environmental commitment for our enterprise, setting some strategic goals across our company to be achieved by 2020. We focused those goals really in three areas: change within our buildings, action in our communities, and then investments in the global economy and really working with our customers. So we launched these goals in 2012. First, let me just say a few words about our operations. You may not know this, we've got nearly 100 million square feet of real estate across the globe, a huge footprint. And so we have significant goals within our footprint to drive down our impact, to manage our energy, our waste, our water usage, and we look for efficiencies. And many of the goals that we will achieve are met through technology innovations across our footprint. So you can see some of the hard target goals we've set. We do have the most LEED certified square footage of any other financial institution in the world. We also last year just built our first net zero energy store in Florida, and so we're looking at a blueprint to scale that model. So we've put significant emphasis in our footprint, in our efficiency, and that's where we're able to engage with many startups and other stakeholders in the built environment. In the community space, we leverage our corporate foundation. So we've got the second largest corporate foundation in the U.S., and we have a $65 million fund that we set aside from the foundation to be able to make impact investments and philanthropic commitments to environmental projects, focusing on advancing clean technologies, supporting STEM and environmental education, and also fostering more resilient communities with many nonprofits across the U.S. we also do a little bit of that philanthropy work globally. And the third piece is really connecting our customers. So we've got customers really across the energy and clean technology value chain. We're the largest ag lender. We're the largest real estate lender. So we've got significant commitments in how do we deploy loans and investments to companies and projects that are helping to provide more clean technology solutions in our communities. So as we thought about these three pillars, we thought, is there some program or opportunity that we could connect all three of these pillars together? And that's where the Innovation Incubator, or IN2 program, was really born. It's a program that leverages our expertise in the building space and our operations, connecting our communities and stakeholders and innovators, as well as engaging customers and seeking new customers. So next slide, please. So a little bit, again, just on some highlights, what we've been up to in the last year across those pillars. I should also point out, we joined the RE100. This is a significant commitment stating that in 2017, this year, we will source 100% of our energy from renewable sources for our nearly 100 million square feet of property. So really significant. We're doing that through a number of tools, virtual PPAs, on-site solar, tax equity, and other partnerships with stakeholders across the U.S. to meet that commitment. In 2016, we provided $17.6 billion in environmental finance lending and investments to green projects and companies. As I mentioned, we see that as a huge opportunity for growth for the company to be deploying capital into that sector. From a philanthropy perspective, last year we provided $15 million in grants supporting environmental causes, part of our $65 million goal. And then we launched the third round of the Innovation Incubator, bringing the total company portfolio up to 20 companies now that we have funded. So I'll get into the details of that now. Next slide. So what's the problem that IN2 is really solving for? And many of you have seen this slide. It's really the double valley of death. I became incredibly frustrated myself as I was going out, meeting with universities, meeting innovators at other accelerator programs and tech transfer, and seeing all these incredible ideas that are very critical in the water space and agriculture and energy efficiency, energy storage, but they were struggling with really two valleys of death, right? So as you innovate, you get out of the lab, there's that technical valley of death that can happen sometimes. How do you have the resources to get technical validation, to find strategic partners to beta test? And then there's also the funding, right, and the commercialization valley of death. So you might, as an entrepreneur, meet some milestones, get some proof of concept, get some traction. But in this space, it's really critical to access patient capital, which can be a challenge for venture capitalists and for other traditional financing. And so we need to get creative and really think about how do we get companies over these valleys of death? How do we rethink strategic partnerships, pilot programs, and how do we rethink financing at each of these stages as companies move through the continuum to get to the commercial market? How do we align better capital sources? So that's really the problem that we were trying to solve for. Next slide, please. So what we did is we sort of took an ecosystem approach. As I mentioned, we were already out in the community funding universities, funding accelerator programs, funding incubators, top business plan competitions around the U.S. I went out and scouted really across the U.S. who was innovating in the clean technology space or who wanted to innovate. So we started building relationships. We started providing mentors from Wells Fargo to help these companies. And we started providing some philanthropy to these groups to help them provide resources to these entrepreneurs. We also connected in other ways with our industry partners, government, municipalities, and other investors that we regularly work with. So we built this ecosystem, and then we identified NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado, as our core partner to help us facilitate and build a platform where we could bring early stage technologies through our program, get them validated, and get them into the marketplace sooner. So our first step was really taking an ecosystem approach, connecting with all these partners in the ecosystem and working together to drive forward commercialization. Next slide. So again, what is the IN2 program? We launched it in 2014. It was an initial investment of $10 million provided by the Wells Fargo Foundation. We're pleased to say that we expanded the program this year, announcing an additional $20 million. So the total funding for the program now is up to $30 million. As I mentioned, we identified NREL as our core administrative partner. They help us administrate those funds. Also, they are our key partner in the technical due diligence of the program. The program today, in the first $10 million, was focused on commercial buildings technologies. Again, that's an area that we knew really well. We knew that within our footprint, we need opportunities to help us reduce our energy footprint. And so we knew our customers would also be looking for those technologies. So we started with commercial buildings. On the slide before, you saw a lot of the ecosystem partners. We've got nearly 40 channel partners. Those are universities and other accelerators that feed us a pipeline of early stage technologies to be considered into the program. So they really create a funnel for us. We go through a due diligence process to select companies to be invited to participate in our program. Those companies are pretty early stage. We look at them in 3 tiers. They might be lab or bench scale. They might have a working prototype, or they might have an early first customer. They might be commercially ready. So those are the 3 tiers of companies that we look at. We look at companies, again, that are addressing solutions in the built environment on a commercial level. So that might be smart lighting and controls, building management systems, smart windows technology, heating and cooling, water reduction technologies, and a whole lot other. How it works is the companies that get into the program receive an initial award or investment of $250,000. This is non-dilutive capital. Again, that's very difficult to find for early stage entrepreneurs. So that's essentially a grant that gets provided to these companies at the very early stage. They take those dollars and they're able to use them at the National Renewable Energy Lab, world-class facility, to get a team of researchers built around the technologies. They can also use it to hire contractors for travel, for other investor engagement. So they take that seed capital and they use it for technical validation as well as some business services that are needed. We help them meet milestones in the lab. And then I think the real secret sauce of our program is once the technologies have met milestones in the lab, we spin them out and deploy them across the Wells Fargo footprint, working on a strategic beta test with entrepreneurs. Next slide. So to date, as I mentioned, in the commercial buildings program, these are the 20 companies, startup companies, that have been awarded funding. Some of these companies have gone on to receive follow-on funding, but these are the companies that have really come through our channel partners all across the U.S. You can see the different commercial building sectors, HVAC, energy storage, data infrastructure, water. So I'd encourage you to study up and learn a little bit more about these companies. We're pleased to say that we've helped these companies move through and meet technical milestones. We've had 2 exits occur with Whisker Labs and VG Smart Glass, so 2 acquisitions that have taken place as we've been able to move those technologies through our program and then go out to the broader community and explain and open source how they're doing, how they're meeting their milestones. Next slide. And so what is the long-term vision for the program? So as I mentioned, we started in the commercial building space. We really have a great model in place. We have a great channel partner ecosystem, so we have no shortage of technologies that we're looking at. We have a great team of experts at NREL, some other subject matter experts that we bring in, and then subject matter experts from inside Wells Fargo's company. It really takes a village to grow a startup here. And so we put all those resources together and try to move these companies into the market. So going forward, we really think that our model can be expanded into additional verticals. We are going to continue the commercial buildings track, but we're also excited to announce that in 2017, we spent doing a discovery, looking at potential other verticals where our model will work in residential building technologies, the food, energy, water nexus, sustainable agriculture, transportation, and energy storage. So in 2018, please stay tuned as we will begin to launch additional verticals with the goal to really get hundreds of companies through our program, through this platform, we also are going out and getting others to join us. So we're talking to other foundations, other corporate partners, other customers that can help us move these companies along. They might provide additional funding. They might provide strategic mentorship or beta opportunities. Again, it's really about the end goal of a smart, connected city. So buildings are one component of that, certainly, but we also have to think about transportation and mobility, how we're moving food and goods and services throughout our communities. So we think that we have an excellent model in place. We've proved out that we can move technologies forward, provide non-dilutive capital, which is a big gap in the ecosystem, and bring more technologies to the market. Next slide. Great. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce LiquidCool Solutions. David will now give a presentation on this technology that's one of the IN2 portfolio companies. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks to everyone for attending today. Let me start out by taking just a few minutes to give you an overview of LiquidCool Solutions technology, how it works, and go over some of the unique advantages and benefits that the technology offers that can have a positive impact on urban sustainability. LiquidCool Solutions is a small startup R&D company located in Rochester, Minnesota. Been in business for about 11 years, and we specialize in an innovative form of liquid immersion cooling for electronics. Immersion cooling simply means that we cool electronic components by immersing them in a fluid that conducts heat but does not conduct electricity. And then we use pumps to circulate this fluid to a place where we can either reuse the heat energy or remove the heat in a convenient and efficient manner. Well, while liquid immersion cooling may seem counterintuitive at first, it's a far more efficient way to cool electronics than using air, which is the predominant approach today, particularly for computer servers and data centers. And actually, most of us have experienced liquid immersion cooling when we dive into a swimming pool. Even though the water temperature may be the same as the air temperature, when you dive into a pool, you immediately feel that chill, when you hit the water. Now, of course, the liquid we use is not water. We use a kind of a light grade synthetic oil to cool, but the effect is the same. We get far more efficient cooling with a liquid. And our technology is particularly effective for computing or for cooling computer servers and data centers, which, as Eric will cover later, consumes a vast amount of electricity worldwide. The image that you're seeing on this slide, by the way, is a close-up portion of a server that's been adapted for our form of immersion cooling. So when this is in operation, all of the components are actually immersed in the fluid, and the coolest fluid is actually directed underneath these green blocks you see with our logo, and that lets us provide the coolest fluid to the components that generate the most heat, which is one of the secrets of our technology. At LiquidCool Solutions, we have a vision, and we call it the liquid cool world. The reality is today that there are upwards of 75 million servers in the world today, and almost all of them, or the vast majority, are cooled using air. So today, when it comes to data centers and server cooling, we live in an air-cooled world. But we envision a world where in the future, if we get to a liquid-cooled world, we'll greatly reduce the energy needed to cool servers. Data centers can be located in buildings where the heat can be reused in an effective way. We won't need to consume any water to cool data centers. And by the way, they'll actually run silently. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And actually, servers will fail less often and last up to twice as long as the air-cooled servers currently do, which will help cut e-waste in half. So that's our vision at LiquidCool Solutions. So let me talk a little bit about how the technology works. Here's a diagram which on the left-hand side shows some server racks. So these would be racks of servers that might be installed in a data center. And you can see red and blue arrows indicating cooler fluid, red arrows indicating the warmed fluid that is being removed from the servers. And we use a pumping system to circulate the fluid. And basically the pumps are are the only moving parts that we absolutely need. And then we can reject the heat or deal with the heat in one of two ways. We would either move the heat outside of the building and use what's called a dry cooler, basically a large radiator with some fans to dissipate the heat outside in a very efficient way. Or in the future, and the subject of the Innovation Incubator study, we can actually reuse that heat energy and apply it to building heating applications. Another thing we point out on this slide is that the cool fluid does not really need to be very cool. It can be as hot as about 122 degrees Fahrenheit, and we'll talk later about why that's important. So what makes LiquidCool Solutions technology unique? It's an approach we called directed flow, which is a patented technology we use. There are two images on this slide. One is in the lower right, you'll see what one of our immersion cooled servers looks like in its sealed enclosure. And on the upper left, you'll see a cutaway version of that same server. And it shows how the cooler incoming fluid gets directed initially to these heat sinks, which are attached over the central processing units, the ones that generate the most heat. And then all of the components are immersed in this fluid. So everything gets cooled by the liquid. And then the outgoing warm fluid gets returned to the fluid distribution system, and the warm fluid will get dealt with in one of two ways. Now, what directed flow really enables us to do, we can keep the components cooler, and we've got control of the flow. The flow, by the way, does not have to be a very high rate. It's typically about a pencil stream of liquid coming out of a faucet. So that's really all the flow we need to provide adequate cooling for a server like this. Here's a look at what some of our systems would look like. On this slide, we show our data center embodiment, where we have up to, depending upon the enclosure we use, up to 96 servers in a data center rack. And you could have many of these installed in a data center. And then you could either have piping underneath the floor, this is a raised floor view, or above the servers to remove the heat to a point at which we're either going to reuse the heat or reject it efficiently to the outside air. And the density we can achieve, or how much computing we can get in a given space is typically maybe 5 to 10 times what is typically needed for air-cooled servers because of the need to allow air to circulate. Here's another embodiment of our technology. We call this edge systems, and this is a smaller version that could be installed in say, an office setting or a research lab. Let me briefly go over some of the advantages and benefits of the technology. The first one and the most obvious one is that we use a lot less electrical power for cooling. And the reason for that is that conventional air-cooled systems need to use fans, both to circulate air through the servers and then to deal with the heated air that's removed from the servers. So typically, for every kilowatt of power that's used for the servers to do useful work, between 300 watts and 700 watts of additional power are needed to cool air-cooled servers. By comparison, for every kilowatt of useful work that a liquid immersion cooled server would need, only about 20 to 60 kilowatts of additional power are needed for cooling. And the reason for that is that we don't have fans in our system, and the pumps are far more efficient than the fans and use a lot less power. A second advantage is that our systems don't need to use water for cooling in almost any climate. Now, didn't I say that the conventional servers are air-cooled? Well, in certain climates, quite a bit of water is used because an approach called evaporative cooling is needed, particularly in warmer climates. And I picked up an estimate by the Lawrence Berkeley lab that projected that water use for cooling data centers would reach 174 billion gallons in just 3 years. So that's a lot of water consumption. Now, the reason that we don't need to use water for cooling is that cooling with our liquid and our directed flow approach keeps the server components between, say, 30 degrees Fahrenheit and 50 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. So we don't have to resort to an evaporative approach as long as the outside air temperature is no more than 115 degrees, which is almost any climate in the world. A third advantage is that because we don't have to circulate air through servers or around servers, and because we don't need very much additional air handling or air conditioning equipment, data centers using our cooling approach take up a lot less space, typically at least 50% less space and up to 80% less space, as shown on this slide. And a fourth advantage, and this one might not be obvious, but it turns out that servers cooled with our immersion technology would be expected to be more reliable. The reason is that by immersing electronics in our heat transfer fluid, they're protected from many of the major causes of electronic failures. There's no exposure to air or any airborne contaminants. We don't have any mechanical parts like fans in the servers. Temperatures are kept more constant, they're kept lower. There's no vibration, there's no exposure to electrostatic discharge. And all of these are factors that plague conventional servers that we don't need to deal with. So servers potentially, because they fail less, because they can be used longer, this can have a significant impact on reducing e-waste. So where do we stand now as far as scaling and commercializing our technology? The goal that we're trying to get to is to license our cooling technology to global IT partners who would then develop and manufacture their products using our immersion cooled systems. And the biggest challenge we face is, once again, we live in an air-cooled world, and as with any new technology, and air cooling, even though it's far less efficient in terms of energy use and some of the other things I've mentioned, it does work. Electricity is still cheap in the United States. And so what we really need to do is establish some proof points. We really need to get server installations out there that can prove that our technology is effective and efficient and delivers the stated benefits. On the final slide here, I do have a few of our proof point installations. The first is at the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is the subject of the Innovation Incubator Program, and that system is still in operation there. And we have two other installations, one in a smart building in Brookfield, Wisconsin, and another in a data center in Milwaukee, which is a converted brewery, by the way, where we're showing that we don't need to add a lot of additional cooling equipment for data centers, servers to operate efficiently. So with that, I will end my piece and hand it over to Eric Kozabal.
Great, thank you, Dave. Yes, my name is Eric Kozabal, and I'm happy to be here to talk about how NREL is helping LiquidCool Solutions. I am a mechanical engineer in NREL's buildings program. A little bit about our program: we advance the science and engineering of energy efficiency in building, schools, communities, and districts by providing the knowledge to integrate and optimize energy systems and renewable power technologies. So it's been great to work with LiquidCool Solutions and the IN2 program, as we see that this technology as one of the things we want to work on to reach this more sustainable future. Next slide, please. So a little bit about data centers. You can see from this graph, which is picked up from an LBNL report, how the current trends of where servers are being installed. And although you hear a lot about these hyperscale or Google-type data centers, the significant majority of servers are still being installed in building integrated data centers, shown in red. Next slide. So diving a little bit more into there, you can see that the top spaces suffer from, well, this graph shows power use in data centers. If we consider the IT equipment of the power servicing the servers and the switches and all that type of equipment as unity, there is power input to other parts of the facility and broken out here. And as you can see, cooling is a major portion that leads to significant energy use. And for those of you who are not familiar with power use efficiency, it is the IT power plus the balance of system power divided by the IT power. So typically, non-hyperscale servers run around 2, essentially requiring just as much energy to run the ancillary equipment as it does the IT equipment. So next slide. So what would be the gold standard for building connected data centers? Well, we would like to remove 100% of the heat and liquid and eliminate the air cooling completely. And then, of course, keep water out of the data center and capture a high enough quality heat, meaning above 135 degrees Fahrenheit, that it's suitable for easy rejection outside without any mechanical cooling equipment that consumes a lot of that power, or hot enough to be able to easily be reused in a building in your, say, hot water heating system or your air heating system in cold climates. Next slide. So to help LiquidCool Solutions, they delivered to us a 8-server rack that we were able to put into our laboratory and to determine how we could meet these goals. What you see here is the 8-server rack. We placed it and its cooling subsystems into a calorimeter type experiment where we can measure accurately all the electrical and thermal flows. Slide. We closed up this calorimeter, supplied the necessary small amount of air to the system and liquid cooling or chilled water to the system at varying temperatures that we could run an experiment with. And of course, we took, next slide, we had plenty of data. What's shown here is analysis of a single data point. So going through that, we were able to distill it down to, next slide please. We were able to distill it down to simple methods to effectively design and control the system and save energy. So this graph right here represents the culmination of this experimental data that shows the average CPU or central processing unit power as reported out by the server system in a software utility that we partnered with Intel to use. And then that's plotted against the CPU core temperature. What this really shows is that we can, with the LiquidCool Solutions technology, maintain under typical applications a CPU temperature that's 20 degrees C warmer than the fluid temperature. Now that's actually a very good heat transfer characteristic, as it requires, in an air-cooled system, up to 50 to 80 degrees C air temperature that's, or the electronics is maybe 50 to 80 degrees C above the air temperature coming in. So that's where the real advantage of the liquid cooling comes in. And then under the most extreme tests, which are not very common, we can keep it under 35 degrees. If you keep advancing. Are you advancing? There we go. So what does this mean? Is that the results of these experiments showed that we can cool the system simply with 50 degree or 122 F inlet coolant, which is important because that type of temperature can be cooled simply with a radiator cooler. It's much like a car engine. We don't have an air conditioner to cool down the engine components of our car. We simply have a radiator because it runs hot enough. Same thing here. We no longer need an air conditioner to cool the air that would cool the servers. We simply can use a radiator to dump the heat outside. And then we can, the system also heats the fluid up to 140 F, which is certainly suitable for heating a building in heating climates. And lastly, we were able to show nearly 100% heat recovery in the fluid, 94% in the small scale demonstration, but approaching 100% as it scales up. Next slide. So armed with this information, we worked with LiquidCool Solutions to develop a demonstration unit that is now operating at NREL's High Performance Computing Data Center here in Golden, Colorado. And this is a system installed in one of the rows in that data center now. Next slide. And the way this data center works is it's a liquid-cooled data center whereby the vast majority of the servers in it are liquid-cooled with a energy recovery water loop shown in orange. Now that energy recovery water loop that's servicing the CDUs of the LiquidCool Solutions system, or the cooling distribution units that have the pumps inside, removes the heat from those servers, and then passes it either to the building's heating system, shown in green, the green lines, or rejects it outside during the summer through the on-site cooling system on the roof of the data center. Next slide. So this is a live screen of the same system. I don't want to get too involved in the details. It's complicated, but you can see the website down at the right-hand corner if you want to study this further. But I want to bring your attention to that liquid cooling is becoming much more accepted. This data center at ESIF achieves low PUEs, or power use intensities, near 1, which is the limit. And furthermore, this data was just taken a couple of days ago. Of the nearly 980 kilowatts of IT equipment energy being used, about 330 kilowatts is being reused and sent back to the heating system for this building. So this is something that, although our demonstration system is a mere 3 kilowatts, it is actually contributing to this facility's energy reuse as we speak. Next slide. So to go over kind of the gold standard for cooling data centers, we've shown that we've been able to remove 100% of the liquid heat in liquid, eliminate air cooling completely, keep water out of the data center, and capture high-quality heat with this LiquidCool Solutions system. Next slide. So what does this mean nationally? As we think about this on a national scale, U.S. data centers use approximately 70 terawatt hours annually, or about 2% of the electric generation capacity in the United States. And of course, the building connected data centers is still a very large proportion of that energy. Next slide. So if you break that energy up into all the subcomponents, the server energy is a significant portion, and of course, as we showed before, the cooling is also nearly as much as the server energy itself. So this is the business as usual case. Now, if we can imagine a world where we immediately switch out all the air-cooled equipment and replace it with LiquidCool's technology, what we find is that we save server energy and we save cooling energy, and the result is 26 terawatt hours of energy savings annually, just in the U.S. alone. And furthermore, of that, advance once more, we can reuse an additional 26 terawatt hours of heat energy where applicable. So with that, I will conclude my portion and hand it back over to Dave.
Great. Yes, this is Jessie. Thanks so much, Ashley, David, and Eric. Interesting stuff. So we're going to transition now into our Q&A. So there's a questions panel on the right in your control panel if you're an attendee, and you can type your questions in. We already have a few questions that have come in already. And if you want to get in touch with David or Eric or the IN2 program, there's email contacts up on your screen now on this last slide. We always have questions about whether there'll be a recording of this webinar, and yes, we record every webinar every month, and we post them on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, as well as on our website on the webinar event page, so you can check back to that. By tomorrow, we'll have that up for you, so you can share that with colleagues who missed today's presentation. There'll also be a PDF of the slides up there as well on our website, so check back. So, couple of questions for you, Ashley, John, and Rashek. John's question is, do you guys welcome international companies into the IN2 program?
Great question. I think that's a goal going forward. To date, we've just worked with domestic channel partners and domestic companies. It's also a little bit tricky. I think Eric could speak to this. If you are an international company and getting access to a DOE national lab, I believe you've got to have a U.S. entity established in order for NREL to provide services. But so hopefully that's a goal in the future, that we will cast a wider net to look at some of the innovations happening around the globe, or find a way to connect them to the program. But thanks for the thought. We'll certainly keep that in mind as we expand.
Great. And Ashley, what kind of timelines do you have for the next round of startups that might want to be part of it? Is there an application date, or is it kind of ongoing? What's the process?
Yes, another great question. So, as one of my slides indicated, in 2017, while we kept the commercial buildings track moving forward, we used it as a discovery year to really think about the expansion of the program, the additional $20 million that we received. How should we go about growing? What verticals should we prioritize, and why? We held a summit in August with about 150 stakeholders across the ecosystem at NREL to help us in a working session really think about, what does expansion mean? How could our model be meaningful? And also from a timeline perspective, how can the team launch the next round? And so with that, we're hoping in December to come out and publish a timeline of when the call for applicants will take place in 2018. I imagine it'll be Q1, maybe early Q2, when we will be doing a call for applicants. We will also, as I mentioned, continue the commercial buildings track, but there's a lot that goes into launching a new vertical. We're going to need to identify new subject matter experts, new channel partners, and so we're working on that behind the scenes. So I would ask if you just stay tuned. We do have a newsletter that you can follow. You can email us at that website there, but hoping in Q1, early Q2 to be launching our next call for applicants.
Great. And one other question from Ashek. Is there a program for companies interested in testing their technology in Wells Fargo real estate footprint, even if they don't go through the IN2 incubator?
Sure, great question. So part of the reason why we set up the incubator funnel is because you could imagine, given our portfolio size, that we do have a lot of companies reaching out to our real estate and our corporate properties managers, and it's really difficult to get through all the interesting technologies that group comes in contact with. And so really the IN2 program is the best way to get recognized for an opportunity. And so again, if you are interested in being referred into the program, I would ask you to send a note to that IN2@NREL.gov, and we can consider how you might be a part of the IN2 program. In some cases, for later stage technologies, so those are already commercially available in the market, we might have a different process for those technologies to integrate into our supply chain for consideration. But again, you could email that link, and we can help you determine which track is best for the technology.
Great. And there's a question about, are you guys interested in energy generation and microgrid technologies? Is that part of your vertical expansion, or is that something you guys already focus on at IN2?
Yeah, great question. So we haven't really gotten to on-site energy generation. We've done storage, and we've looked at some of the microgrid functionality. I think as we expand into the transportation vertical, for example, we might get more into vehicle-to-grid type technology, building to vehicle, buildings controls, things like that. And so more to come there as we expand the scope among commercial buildings.
Great. And this question, I think for you, David, Reed is asking, does computer equipment need to be adapted prior to being immersed in fluid?
Well, we do make some minor adaptations. I will just say that all of the components we use are standard available computer components, but we do add, you'll notice those green blocks on, I think, my first slide. Those are special heat sinks that we put over the CPUs to deliver the coolest flow. So we'll add heat sinks. We need to use this. Well, it gets a little bit technical, but let me just say the adaptations are fairly minor. And actually, in a liquid cool world, we need to deal with air-cooled components. So we do need to, in today's world, we do need to make some minor modifications. But that being said, essentially any configurations can be adapted easily for use with our technology. It's a simple answer.
Okay. Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So a couple more questions, actually one for you, Ashley. You said that a lot of the issues is non-diluted capital, and I know you travel around the U.S. constantly looking at what partners are doing and how to build an ecosystem to support these double valley of death challenges, but who else is providing non-diluted capital, and how can we increase access to non-diluted capital? Is there a big role to play for philanthropy that they're not stepping up to other than Wells Fargo? Or can you just say a little bit about how we can do a better job of increasing that non-diluted capital and what conversations you've been having inside your network?
Sure, absolutely. As I do go around to a lot of different meetings where the topic of, the double valley of death is addressed, and also how do we align the right capital sources for Cleantech? As we know, these are hard science in many cases. Patient capital is really needed, and so we have to rethink at what point, do we deploy capital? And so, there's some that are out there talking about Cleantech financing 2.0. Some are out there talking about Cleantech financing 3.0. Just depends on who you talk to. But I think, part of IN2's kind of open sourcing model and the ecosystem approach is that, we've sort of proved out that how do you leverage a corporate foundation, a national lab, other universities, other NGO partners to be able to trickle down resources that can get non-dilutive capital into the early stage. And so, as we worked all that out, we hope that it's a model for others to think about structures that they could come up with. I've seen some other structures in PRIs, program-related investments, or MRIs, mission-related investments, that can do something similar. But I really think that the corporate foundations can step up and play a role. University endowments are another interesting area, and then the impact investor network. And so I was actually just at an event this week with about 50 active impact investors and family offices. And what a trend that I'm seeing is family offices are really beginning to work together and syndicate deals, to share the risk and to have a longer time horizon. And so they may bifurcate, non-dilutive capital out of their charitable funds, and then they might layer in some traditional investment capital, but again, it has a longer timeline. And so I think there's a lot of really active and creative groups out there coming together, trying to figure out in the early stage, how do we get more non-dilutive into the market and leverage organizations like NREL to do the technical due diligence? Because once the stamp of approval happens there, we've de-risked the technology, then we can start looking for meaningful pilots, and then we can have more venture or other strategic dollars come into the market after we've de-risked the technology. So, be a little patient, but I think you're going to see a lot of partners coming together, corporates, impact investors, family offices, really rolling up their sleeves and working hard on this. And it might be a future topic for another Meetings of the Minds, or if you follow me on LinkedIn, I try to document as much as I can that I'm seeing in that space.
You read my mind, Ashley. That's like a half-day workshop at the 2018 annual summit. So I'm excited. We should talk about that. That's a very exciting space we need to keep track of and pull partners together for. So a couple other questions, maybe this one for you, David or Eric. I'll let you decide. So David, you said there's 70 million servers right now in the U.S. And Eric, you said that takes up about 26 terawatt hours of energy, if I think I got that right, annually. Or maybe that would be the savings if we move to liquid cool. Could one of you touch on what projections you're seeing for 2030, 2050 if we don't tackle the electricity impacts, the greenhouse gas impacts, the carbon impacts, environmental impacts of this data center space? Maybe over to you, David, first, of what you're seeing these impacts could be for the sustainability of cities and regions, et cetera.
Well, I think I'm actually going to see if Eric has a response. You may have better access to projections and statistics than I do, Eric.
Well, I haven't actually seen projections beyond what I presented today. However, some of out to 2020 at least, I've seen that for the most part, building connected systems or data centers are at the very least flat, whereas the growth is happening in the maybe more in the cloud connected systems. However, that can't possibly be a trend out to as we continue to grow more and more buildings, more be a centralized economies around urban areas. I would imagine that building connected data centers will continue to grow as well. So of course all of these systems are run 24 hours a day at a constant levels. They need generally all electric systems, so it's a one-for-one count on how many terawatt hours they use to how much carbon emissions they produce.
Right. Yeah, so interesting impacts and thinking out into the future, something we like to do a lot at Meeting of the Minds. One more question for you, Ashley, from Richard Stenero. How much are you guys thinking about industrial IoT? And then the same question over to you, Eric, at NREL. If you could tell us a little bit more about what's happening with industrial IoT at the lab as well. So, Ashley, first over to you. Is that an interest now for Wells Fargo, or will be in the future?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great thought. For now, we're just focused on commercial buildings. Again, that's where our expertise really lies within our own footprint, and as the largest real estate lender, we certainly can have a lot of influence in our customer base there. But I do think that's an interesting thought as we expand the commercial buildings program is including industrial as a component there. an ability to work with communities and customers in that space. That can be some of the low-hanging fruit, right? So appreciate the thought there. We'll certainly keep you posted on that.
Great. And Eric, any thoughts about how NREL is addressing the industrial IoT space, or are you talking to your colleagues about that? Any thoughts?
I think that's an area that we touch on very loosely. I think there is a lot of overlap between commercial in this space. For instance, LiquidCool Solutions is certainly not only for, or developing technologies not only for commercial buildings, but in the industrial space as well. Maybe Dave has any comment on that. But
yeah, Dave, any thoughts?
Well, we do. I didn't focus on it in this particular presentation, but one of the other advantages, because we can seal our systems and avoid exposure to air and other environmental kinds of hazards, we can deploy our server systems in places that tend to be dirtier or less environmentally controlled, and that in industrial spaces might be one of those. So we do have offerings for that particular environment. I just didn't cover them in the presentation today.
Great. People can get in touch with you if they have questions.
Yep.
So, yeah, thank you, guys. This has been really fantastic. Great overview of how a financial institution and a federal lab and a startup have all been working together to really shift the environmental footprint. So that's exciting, and we want to see more models like this out there. We have to wrap up, so a short survey is going to pop up once everyone closes their browser, and we really appreciate your feedback, and we hope to see all of you at next. We don't have a webinar next month, but we will in November. We also hope to see you on our blog, and next month is our annual Leadership Summit in Cleveland, as I mentioned, from October 23 to 25, and some of our presenters will be there with us, and there'll also be some other folks from NREL in the room, Josh Sperling and some of his colleagues as well. So hope to see everybody in Cleveland. It's going to be a great event, and more information about all of our events and all of our digital resources and best practices is all available at meetingoftheminds.org. So with that, I'm just going to wrap things up and thank Ashley, David, and Eric. Thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing all of your work with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.
Great. Thank you, guys. So that concludes our session today, and have a great rest of your day, everybody. And thanks so much for attending. We'll see you all on our website. Talk to you soon.